Hello, and welcome to this fourth video in the mini-series building the TTI Success Insight psychometric models in a simple way on the whiteboard so that you can understand them. In the first video, we looked at the behavioral model DISC, how we like to engage with the world and communicate. In the second video, we looked at why we do what we do, our personal interests, attitudes, and values, our motivators, our driving forces that initiate action, or why. In the third video, we looked at competencies, or what skills have we developed that modify our behaviors, and specifically, we looked at the top 5 leadership competencies. In this, the fourth video, I want to look at the EQ model, and I'm going to build a model for you on the whiteboard and explain the simple concept, the simple ideas behind the EQ model. But very specifically, I want to focus on our view of emotional intelligence, which is that it is a learned skill, and that the secret is to become active in specific areas of emotional intelligence, and that what we're actually measuring in our EQ assessment is how active you are in these areas. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into the whiteboard and look at the model. Okay, to build the model, we start with a small rectangle here in the center. I'll explain that to you in a while. And then we draw an X and a Y axis. And here we have the foundation of our EQ model. And the first axis, we're looking here at the notions of awareness and action. So what we're measuring here is awareness and action. And on the other axis, we're looking at self and others. Now, what this model gives us is 4 quadrants, and these quadrants are obvious. We can name them. The first one here is self-awareness. The second one is self-regulation. The third one is social awareness. And the fourth one is social regulation. Now, when we look at this model, the question that we're asking ourselves in am I active? Am I active in specific areas? What we're measuring is how active are you in a specific area. So there's no right or wrong. As with all the assessments, there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There just is. And what you're really trying to understand is where there are areas for development, where there are strengths that you can build on, and so on. So what we're measuring here is how active you are in specific areas of awareness and action of self and others. So the first one is self-awareness. How aware am I of my emotional makeup? How aware am I of what's happening to me emotionally in specific circumstances? For example, somebody says something to me that offends me or that upsets me. There's an emotional response, and this emotional response can hijack you. It can actually take you over, and you can lose your awareness. Chemistry is released into the body and into the brain, and it shuts down particular parts of your cognitive, your higher functions, and you lose awareness. And having lost awareness, of course, it's very hard to regulate yourself, to regulate your emotional response, to feel it, to understand it, and to be able to do something about it. So self-awareness is the foundation, truly, of this model. The second area that we're measuring is self-regulation. So once one's aware of an emotional response, for example, as I said, somebody says something to you and you feel upset or you feel distraught, you feel something. What are you able to do with that? You feel it, but so what? You feel it, you're aware of it. Now, what are you going to do about it? Are you able to actually control this emotional response? You may not wish to control it, by the way. You may wish to let it go. There was a great quote I saw somewhere about anger, and said that there's actually nothing wrong with anger per se, but the secret is to be angry in the right way, at the right time, with the right person, the right circumstance, and so on, as opposed to just random anger. So it doesn't mean that one is suppressing emotions. It means one is choosing how to use emotions. So self-regulation is the capacity to actually regulate, having experienced and felt something, being aware of an emotional response, to be able to regulate that response so that it doesn't overwhelm you, and that you can choose actually how to use the emotions that are happening. So if we're self-aware and able to regulate, we can be present, we can control our emotions, and that gives us the capacity to actually understand what's going on for somebody else, to be aware of what they're experiencing in our interaction, and in that awareness have the capacity then to go to where they are and work with them to change what they're experiencing so you can have a more meaningful interaction, to help them, if you wish, regulate that emotion or have a different emotional experience. Now, of course, you find people who are strong in one area, very active in another area, practicing it very, very actively, and not practicing another. For example, you find somebody who's very strong on the self side, like they're very self-aware and very self-regulated, but poor on social awareness and social regulation. They're poor on the other side. Or you find people who are very strong on awareness. They're very aware of themselves and they're very aware of others, but they're very poor on regulation themselves and regulating interactions, or indeed people who are strong on regulation and poor on awareness. So you can have different mixes in this model. The box in the middle is for motivation. And the key here in motivation is to understand this is not the driving forces and those motivators we spoke about in the second video in this little series. This is a different type of motivation. It's an intrinsic motivation, an intrinsic drive, a sense of, and the word I really like is a sense of purpose. It's the closest I've come to understanding what this intrinsic motivation is. It is something beyond your driving forces, something beyond making a buck, or something beyond even being happy. It's an intrinsic sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, that there's a reason you exist and there's something that you want to accomplish, there's something you want to do, typically with your life. And people who have this motivation, it gets them out of bed, it gets them going, and it allows them, I think, to be much more effective. So those are the 5 areas of this EQ model, a la Daniel Goleman. And our tool is based on his emotional quotient model. Now, a couple of points I want to make about EQ. And I want specifically just to draw one little graph for you. And this is a graph that I saw drawn by Daniel Goleman in a talk that he gave to Google. So he drew 2 axes, and one axis was IQ and one axis was EQ. And he asked a simple question. He asked the people attending the seminar, what do they think the relationship was between IQ, raw intellect, if you wish, and EQ, emotional intelligence? And people gave many, many answers. But the answer was actually this. The answer, in fact, that it was completely random. There was no relationship between the two of them. No relationship at all. However, here was the point, the telling point, I think, in his talk that really caught my attention. He drew a circle like this and said, well, if that is the total population, and if we say that at the level of superior performers, in terms of C-suite people and superior performers, people at the top of the pile, there's a floor on IQ. To get into the game, to be able to play at that level, you need a certain raw intellect, a certain intellectual capacity, alphanumeric and so on, intelligence, or else you really just can't function at that level. And here was the point he made. If you look at that, you will notice that the spread between the top of that curve and the bottom for IQ is tiny, but the spread for EQ is significant. And the point he was making was that at the top of the pile, it is EQ, it is this that matters. The capacity to understand and regulate yourself, understand and regulate your interactions with others. It's the capacity to actually work effectively with other human beings is a differentiator. It's not IQ. You have to have the IQ to get into the game, but once you're in the game, it's actually emotional intelligence that defines whether or not you'll be successful, irrespective of what the game actually is. My last comment on emotional intelligence is very simple. If one wants to develop one's emotional intelligence, one has to accept that it can be developed. One has to accept that emotional intelligence is not fixed, that in fact you can grow it. It is a skill. And I want to write this word here, a skill. And I want to ask you a simple question. You know that natural born leader, the person who had a very high emotional intelligence as a very, very young child. And we tend to say, well, you know, they were born that way. They were a born leader. They were just really, really good with people. They were just born that way. But I'd argue the case that's not true. I'd argue the case, in fact, they just learned it at a very young age. Whatever the circumstances were, the environment they were in, or their parents or their peers, whatever, they learned emotional intelligence at a very, very young age. And of course, what happens then is this tends to become a virtuous cycle. You're emotionally intelligent, you work well with people, they like you, they support you, and it becomes a sort of self-reinforcing model, as opposed to, of course, the vicious cycle where you are poor in that area initially, and that becomes, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're poor, so people don't get on with you well, and off you go. So think about it as a skill that being developed at any age. Typically, as we get older, our emotional intelligence, i.e. our self-awareness, self-regulation, and so on, improves. That's why it's considered to be ageist and can't be used, and typically cannot be used or should not be used in recruitment, because, of course, it has an adverse impact on younger people. But that argument, I think, also holds for developing it as a skill. As you develop and as you grow and as you mature, you can grow and develop your emotional intelligence. And this is the defining skill for success in all aspects of life. Remember what Daniel Goleman said here. In all areas of life, it is the defining skill. So think about this very, very carefully. This is a skill that you can learn and grow. I'm going to give you one simple example of this. And whenever I feel criticized, when somebody challenges me or criticizes me, or I feel very defensive, all of a sudden I don't like criticism because I was criticizing a lot as a young person growing up. So when I feel this, I have this awareness, I feel the emotion, I feel the criticism, I can feel the flush in my cheeks, I can feel the chemistry happening, I feel it. I stop and I say, no, no. And then I look over my shoulder, very, very simply. So I stop and say no, look over my shoulder, and I ask myself the question, where is this coming from? So this physical act of looking over my shoulder, I say, where is it coming from? And I can see where it's coming from in my youth. I can see why I don't like to be criticized, why I always had to be right and always had to be better, and so on and so forth. I see where it's coming from. I recognize, and in that recognition, I can regulate and I can let it go. These kind of tactics are the key to the development of emotional intelligence. So remember, emotional intelligence is measuring, am I active in specific areas of self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and social regulation. And it also includes the core concept of intrinsic motivation, a sense of purpose. Secondly, emotional intelligence is a skill. It is something that can be developed and learned. And thirdly, it's developed and learned by practicing, having tactics and strategies that when a situation arises, you can actually deal with it. So things like, for example, journaling, meditation, exercise, and so on are all tools, believe it or believe it not, that are really powerful in developing one's emotional intelligence. So I'll leave you with that. The next video that we're going to look at is axiology, Acumen Capacity Index. So I hope you enjoyed this one on emotional intelligence. I look forward to building the ACI model with you in the next video. Thank you.